I didn't realize it at the time, but playing bridge is an amazing training for data science. We could just use Power BI to pull that HR data in. There's really three areas that you've got your technical area, and you can't talk the language that the users talk. You're going to lose them.
Welcome to the today's Data Talk with Doers episode. Today we have and very excited to have Brian Jules joining us as our special guest. Brian has worked for over 30 years in a variety of data-driven roles for the US federal government, including economist, being an economist, business analyst, data scientist, deputy chief financial officer, project manager, and more. Currently, Brian is the Chief Content Officer of Enterprise DNA Limited, a leading provider of Power BI education and resources. With over 20K followers, Brian is known for his expertise in data analytics, project management, and financial operations. And not to mention, he's definitely a content creator to watch out for. Brian has a deep passion for exploring data and discovering new insights. And while going through his LinkedIn profile, I noted that he once said, "There is nothing that compares the thrill of data revealing something unexpected and counterintuitive about the world works." So in this episode, we will be discussing about Brian's impressive career journey, his thoughts on the evolving field of data analytics, and his advice for those interested in pursuing a data-driven career. So without further ado, let's dive in and welcome Brian Julius to the show. Welcome,
Thanks,
Brian.
David. Thanks. Wonderful to be here today.
Thank you. So let's get started. Could you please elaborate more on your background?
Yeah, sure. So it goes all the way back to basically as a kid that I was always fascinated with numbers and particularly like sports statistics. So I remember as a young kid kind of poring over the sports box scores and just trying to figure the world out through numbers. And then as a teenager, I got really into playing competitive bridge. So my dad and I used to play tournaments all over the country, and I didn't realize it at the time, but playing bridge is an amazing training for data science, because really all it is basically kind of applied probability and statistics with limited information. And I didn't realize at the time it was just something I enjoyed doing. But as I got into college and started getting into the data field, I realized it's incredibly applicable. And over time, I've met a number of people who got into the data field playing poker, and were professional poker players, and had the same experience where they found kind of surprisingly it translated beautifully, career-wise. And so when I was in college, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to study, and I just remember sitting in my first econometrics course, and the professor getting up and basically just talking about how you could understand the world through economics and econometrics, and it just clicked. I just remember sitting there thinking, this is what I want to do, and this is where I want my career to go. And so that's what I did. It was kind of at the point in time where you really couldn't get into the field without a graduate degree. I think now it's changed dramatically, and I think much for the better, where you don't need that formal training. But at the time you did. So I went to graduate school, and then came out and started in consulting, and it was economics and litigation support consulting. And that was a great training ground too, because you were constantly working on different projects, different data sets, different applications of methods. And from there moved into the government, into a data role of economist and data analyst, and so that's kind of where it all started.
How did you become interested in Power BI? Because most of your posts that I see is relevant to data analytics and with BI, and especially the tool called Power BI. So how did you become interested in that tool?
Yeah, that was an interesting story because I probably 4 years ago I'd never heard of it, and I was working for the government, and I had been in for really the past 15 or 20 years at that point. I'd been primarily in management positions, managing teams of financial analysts and data analysts and scientists. And I kind of burned out on that. And so I wanted to get back into getting my hands dirty with data. And so I got put on a project our office had failed an audit on our financial system. And we brought in a team of accountants and financial analysts, and we also brought in Microsoft to help us. And they recommended a combination of Dynamics 365 and Power BI. And at the time, I'd never heard of Power BI. And I saw what it could do in a presentation they made, and I said, wow, if I'm going to be managing this project, I need to learn this. And so at nights and on weekends, I was just watching YouTube videos and reading blog articles, and it just really clicked with me. I looked at it and I said, this is amazing. That beyond just the financial project we were working on, I said, this is applicable to every data problem that we have. The ability to kind of dynamically build out reports and dashboards that could be easy and intuitive for users to address their own data needs, and at the same time, kind of provide that single source of truth with regard to numbers, kind of not have everybody just relying on their own kind of handmade Excel, spreadsheets and solutions. And so I got deep into it, and I still, think it's just a transformative technology.
Great. That was an interesting story, Brian. So, can you tell us about a specific project that you worked on that showcases your skills in Power BI? Like, or if there are any challenges, how did you overcome them?
I think one of them was an early one that I did. So one of the things that our office used to struggle with was HR, and the government HR process is very complicated. It's this long multi-step process to get hired in the government. And so our managers were always asking our HR people, what's the status of this action? What step is it at? Whose court is the ball in? What do I need to do anything? Am I waiting for the HR person to do something? And it was kind of driving our HR people crazy because they were constantly, instead of doing work, they were just responding to all these information requests. And I said, boy, we could just use Power BI to pull that HR data in, process it automatically, and then provide a really intuitive report for the managers to look at and know exactly, basically any HR action, to know exactly where that stood, and not only what stage it was at, but who was responsible. Were they within the time that we had budgeted for that step, or were they late? If they were late, had a contact already been made? And so it just really took a major problem area and just created a strength out of it, in terms of everybody would come in the morning and just look at their actions and say, okay, I know exactly where they stand. And it freed up our HR people to be doing, real substantive work and moving actions forward rather than just responding to information requests. So that was one of the big successes I think I've had with it.
Great. So, how did you come across? If you have come across any challenges, how did you overcome it, Brian? So, did you have a specific team that worked under Power BI, or is it all that you had certain colleagues to reach out to? How was it for you?
It was interesting because at the time nobody in the agency was using it, and even within my office, they just kind of let me run with it. That we had agreed to use it for the financial project, and I started seeing all these applications for it in other areas of our business, and they just kind of let me run with it. And so I didn't have any internal support. The IT team was really good, but not experienced at all with Power BI. And so what I ended up doing was, that's how I first got connected with Enterprise DNA. That I was just looking for YouTube videos and resources to learn, and they had a great community. So I joined there as a member and started asking questions on their forum. Started kind of getting connected with people who knew things, and that was one of the big challenges, was just kind of being a sole developer, and not even with a background in software development by any stretch. That my background was economics and data, and so it was kind of one of the challenges was just learning the software development process, and the other part of it was kind of doing it off on an island by myself and trying to find, okay, where can I get really good resources to support me and answer questions, learn best practices from. And so that was probably my biggest challenge. I think the other thing was also making sure, and this is one that I still to this day find a challenge, is making sure that users find the report easy to use and understand it in the way that I think they understand it. And so, we do a lot of testing, a lot of user testing to make sure that the way we are intending the users to use the report is actually the way they are using it.
So I could totally relate to that, the user testing, Brian, because I've been in several teams developing dashboards, and the success relies on how your user use your dashboard, right? It shouldn't be something that it shouldn't be one-off. So what you said, I could totally relate. And so what do you think are the key skills and knowledge areas that one has to develop to make the transition to a Power BI career, or rather a BI analyst or someone like that? So what do you think are the key skills and knowledge areas?
It's a great question, and I was just posting about this last night, that I think there's really three areas. That you've got your technical area, and I think that is, I think having, obviously strong Power BI skills, strong Excel skills. I think, SQL is one that I didn't learn, coming from the economics field, but it's one that I know for many people is a really good foundational skill and translates to a lot of other areas. And certainly, Power BI doesn't require SQL, but the concepts both within DAX and within the data transformations that you need to do borrow a lot from SQL concepts, and so that's a good one. I think for me, what I found is it's not a requirement, but knowing R or Python just allows you to dramatically expand what Power BI can do. When you kind of add the analytical power of a Python or an R to Power BI, you just get an amazing analytical tool. And so that's kind of the technical side of what I think you need to know. I think the next thing is the business side, the domain information, that I think really having an understanding of how your business works. And, for me, a lot of it was how money moved through the organization, and being able to track those funds and know, okay, what pot of money was restricted for what use, and how did that money flow through the system. That domain information is critical. And then I think the other thing that I think sometimes gets undervalued are the soft skills. That I think communication, I think, kind of verbal presentation, that I think being able to succinctly and clearly communicate to non-technical users, I think is a hugely important skill. that I think if you're trying to roll out a dashboard or really any project, and you can't talk the language that the users talk, you're going to lose them. That they they're not experts in Power BI in any stretch. They're not going to understand if you talk in Power BI language. They're not going to understand what you're getting at. And so, being able to communicate the value of these projects and how they work in a way that doesn't require that sort of technical knowledge, I think is absolutely essential. And I think also just the interdisciplinary and interpersonal part of it, that you're going to need to work with, for a successful project, with the IT folks, with the financial folks, with folks involved with software development, with the end users, and being able to work with and relate and coordinate and collaborate with all sorts of people with different backgrounds and perspectives and interests in the project, I think is hugely important, and I think is really sometimes, as I say, undervalued. I think sometimes there's too much emphasis put on the technical and not on the domain and soft skills. So I think that's kind of the balance that you need for Power BI or really any project to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that was a very detailed answer, Brian, because I was expecting something like technical, but what you said was very true. You need to have the balance between the technical and the soft skills, right? So, and with along with the domain. So that was really nice to hear. I mean, it definitely helps people to understand what needs to be developed. And so you said you had to go through certain resources when you were learning by yourself. Could you give any specific resources or tools that was helpful for you at the time or now while learning Power BI?
Yeah, I mean there are so many. There's so many good ones. I mean it's really it's remarkable kind of how broad and deep the content in Power BI is. So some of the main ones that I learned from were Enterprise DNA, as I mentioned, was a core one. Guy in a Cube by Adam and Patrick from Microsoft. They cover a wide range of topics, and that was really helpful. Ruth Consuelo Martinez from Kerbal does a wonderful job, particularly with DAX of teaching. The guys at SQL BI, I learned a tremendous amount from. And then there are just some great books. I've always been a book learner as well, and so there are a number of really essential books that I go back to just time and time again. The Definitive Guide to DAX is one. Greg Deckler's DAX Cookbook is one that I find hugely helpful. There are a number of books on data modeling that I think are data modeling in Power BI, and I should have addressed this in the previous question. Data modeling is the key. That if you get your data model right in Power BI, everything else is easy. And if you don't build a good star schema data model in Power BI, you're sunk out of the gate. That it almost doesn't matter how good you are at anything else. Your report is not going to work. And so there are some really good data modeling books. I'm looking over at my shelf. There's one called Expert Data Modeling in Power BI by Sohail Bakshi. That's wonderful. The Data Warehouse Toolkit by Ralph Kimball is an essential one. So yeah, those are probably the biggest resources that I used. Although now there are some additional ones, and particularly I'm thinking about Rick DeGroot, BI Gorilla. He does a great job, particularly with M Code and Power Query. which is essential for cleaning your data and for data modeling. And his stuff is top notch. So those are some of the big ones. I could go on and on, but those are probably the ones I rely on most heavily.
Wow, that's great to know, Brian. What's the job market like for BI professional? Like, in specific, it can be specific to Power BI or anything. But would your advice be? What would your advice be if you're giving it to someone who's looking to break into the field?
The two biggest things you can do is network. I think LinkedIn is an incredible resource, and I didn't, for most of my career, I didn't use it. That when I was in the government, we did a very, very specific thing, and the people who did that thing, it was something called natural resource damage assessment, and it was related to oil spills and chemical spills and waste sites and recovering damages from that. And so it's a small field, and there aren't that many people who do it. And so we all knew each other. And I knew the people on the other side of the cases. I knew the people at other agencies. And so LinkedIn just wasn't something that was that important. And then when I moved out of the government into the enterprise DNA role, it became hugely important. And, I realized, kind of the importance of that external networking. And for the past year and a half or so, I've been really active on LinkedIn, and it has been remarkable in terms of both as a learning resource and as a networking resource. And so, I think probably the most important thing you can do is build that network, because much of the opportunity that comes along comes through people either recommending a job or knowing your skills. I mean, that's what happened to me. Was I didn't apply for the job I'm in now. That I just was active in the community. I was competing in data challenges. I was answering forum questions. I was, active on LinkedIn, and the CEO of the company just reached out to me and offered me the job based on my networking and my portfolio. And portfolio is the other thing that I think is absolutely critical. Is I'm always a big fan of show, don't tell. So if somebody's looking for BI skills, if you've got a great portfolio, I spend years and years hiring people in the government, and I can tell more from 15 minutes of looking at somebody's portfolio than I can interviewing them for 2 hours. I can immediately tell if you know what you're doing by looking at your BI portfolio. And so I think, having a good public portfolio, I think, getting that out there, and then if you combine the portfolio and the networking, that is an incredibly powerful combination. And I see all kinds of people, including there's one guy I've been working with who's still in college, and he's got an amazing portfolio, really sharp guy, and he's now getting lucrative consulting offers and projects coming through while he's a student. He's not even advertising, he's not marketing. These jobs just come to him. And I think the BI market is such that if you really have a great public profile and a great portfolio, jobs will come to you. And I see that over and over again.
Yeah. Oh, that was a great example you offered, Brian. I'm sure people viewing this will definitely get to know how important it is and to start working on it too. With respect to this Power BI tool, what do you think are the most common mistakes that people make when using Power BI, and how can they even avoid them?
Wow, that's a great question. I think there's a few mistakes I see a lot, which is the first one is basically just trying to advance too fast and immediately kind of trying to do too much. And I think Power BI is something that really rewards an understanding of kind of the foundational aspects. And so I think really understanding the data modeling, understanding There's a concept called Roche's maxim that Matthew Roche from Microsoft came up with, which is that data should be pushed as far upstream as possible and as far downstream as necessary. And that has been, for me, just the core concept in Power BI, which is to try to move everything as close to the source as possible. So if you've got a data warehouse, pull as much from that data warehouse as you can. Do your transformations there. And I think there's a lot of decisions people make early in Power BI to use DAX for everything. And DAX, for some reason, DAX just captures people's imagination. And it's really the case that DAX should be your last resort, not your first. That the first resort should be moving things out of, processing them out of Power BI and pulling them in already transformed. The second thing should be using Power Query and M Code to shape your data and get into a good data model. And then the last resort should be DAX, which is used really primarily, or should be used primarily in my view, for things that have to be dynamic within the context of that report session. If it doesn't need to be dynamic in that reporting session, move it elsewhere. And that will really simplify everything you do in Power BI. So I think if you combine good data modeling and Roche's maxim, Power BI becomes dramatically easier. I'll see people who are writing, these 60-line DAX measures, and if your DAX is that complicated, your data model is broken. And so, I think the over-reliance on DAX is a big one. I think the lack of emphasis on data modeling is another one. And then I think I see a lot of mistakes in terms of people using visuals for the sake of variety. They'll say, okay, line charts and bar charts and column charts and scatter charts are boring. Let me put all these other types of visuals in. And many of them are terrible. I think that there's a reason why those kind of core visuals are those core visuals, and it's because they're proven effective. And I think, I don't know if you're familiar with the IBCS, the International Business Communication Standards, but it's a framework of visualization concepts for reporting that I think is spot on, and it really guides I think the development of very intuitive reports, actionable reports, and I think that many users, particularly beginning users, would be really well served by kind of simplifying their reports in a way that's consistent with those IBCS standards. So that's probably a longer answer than you were bargaining for, but those I think are the major mistakes people make, and I think kind of the ways to correct those.
Yeah. So, yes, Brian, so you said you talked about the visuals, right? And I could testify for that, because when I started my dashboard, building dashboards, I was very overwhelmed and I started using several cool visuals. And this is one of the story that I posted recently, and people did not like it. I must say my manager or anybody who I was giving the report for, they couldn't understand what I was doing. So like you said, sticking to the simple visuals or the standards that we have to maintain is very critical. And I would like to reiterate that point here.
Yeah, and I think people get. I've made the mistake too. You get enamored of cool looking stuff, and you think, oh, this will be neat to show in the in the dashboard, and and it's got animation and it's got this and that, and it's like, in general, it's not going to help. That it's if anything, it's gonna muddy the picture. And I think kind of the focus should always be on kind of clear and actionable recommendations. I think another mistake people make is they kind of treat their reports like a novel. It's like you make the user kind of go through the whole story to get to the conclusions. And I always feel like you should put those conclusions right up front, make them very obvious, and then give the user the ability, if they want, to drill down into the details. That it may very well be that your manager, all they want to see, that they trust your analysis, and all they want to see is the bottom line. And they should be able to see that on the first page really clearly. But then if they want to be able to drill down into the details and see how you derive that, what's the supporting information, they should be able to do that in a clear way. But don't make your users follow your thought process to get to the information they want. And I see that a lot, that people, it's almost like they treat it like a mystery novel, that you've got to read to the end to find out what happens. And that's the wrong way to build reports.
Yeah, true. So I see you post a lot about the up-to-date latest developments. So how do you stay up-to-date with those developments in terms of Power BI or any data relevant tools for that matter?
Yeah, boy, that's a hard one these days, because it's just the changes are coming so fast, and there are some really great resources, kind of that I'm thinking for Power BI. Microsoft publishes a blog that always updates the latest changes. And Power BI is particularly challenging to keep up with because it updates every month. And every month they have major changes. And so if you skip, even a few weeks sometimes of keeping up, you're gonna feel lost. And so there are a number of folks, Helen Wall from LinkedIn and Chris Wagner on LinkedIn and Twitter. They do a great job. They provide every month. They provide a really clear visual summary of what the changes are, and they kind of make their picks for what the most important changes have been that month. There's a guy named Ed Freeman who publishes something called Power BI Weekly, and it's a weekly newsletter, and he is one of the unsung heroes of Power BI. That he puts this thing together every week. I think it's up to almost 200 issues that he's been doing it. So he's been doing it for almost 4 years, and it goes through in just a few pages a week, kind of all the big developments, all the big content that's been produced by the top creators, and so those, I would say that the Helen Wall, Chris Wagner summary, the Microsoft blog, and the Power BI Weekly are probably the three best ways to keep up with Power BI.
Great.
But generally, LinkedIn is an amazing resource, and there are so many good content creators for Power BI that I just every morning the first thing I do is kind of scan my feed. But yeah, I would say those three are kind of my core ones.
Great to know, Brian. So, there is always an importance of data literacy and data-driven decision making, right? So, how do you think Power BI can help with these efforts?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think one of the things Power BI can do is it can really put data in the hands of the decision maker, and I think, rather than having to go, you're going through an analyst in the sense that it's the analysts who are helping build these dashboards and reports. But one of the things it does is it really puts the ability to query the data and to kind of address your individual questions in the hands of the decision makers. And I think that both presents a challenge and an opportunity, in the sense that it puts the importance of data literacy right up front. That somebody who, may not be, hugely data literate, in the past could rely on, kind of interactions with analysts to kind of bridge that gap. But when you're querying the data yourself and interpreting it yourself, it really puts an onus on, I think, each individual user to have a level of data literacy. And I think it's also the responsibility of the developers and the business users who are putting those reports together to think about what level of data literacy is the user going to have in order to properly use and interpret this report. And, I think it's a partnership of working together with the decision makers and the project sponsors to make sure that people who are using these tools have that level of data literacy. I think, data literacy training is very important. I think in some fields it kind of comes more naturally because, most people who've, kind of gotten to the decision-making level may have come from a technical area, but in some cases not. And so, I think kind of understanding your audience and understanding the level of data literacy they have is incredibly important. And I think where necessary, kind of not just putting the data in their hands, but teaching them how to interpret and understand that data is hugely important.
So, this is a random question. So I see that your LinkedIn growth has been a huge success because I've been following you and I've seen how far you have come and the posts that you have written. So what is the strategy that you follow, Brian? Is it is there any secret or is it a consistent journey?
It really is, it is a learning journey every day, and I think you and I got to know each other through LinkedIn Hard Mode. And, that is my number one recommendation to anybody who's thinking about posting content, that it's a program that was developed by Albert Bellamy, and you know Albert well. And he was a former Marine and also, always somebody interested in data. And he kind of developed it as a way to guide people in how to use the algorithm within LinkedIn and become an effective content creator. And it's a challenge that requires 30 days of continuous posting at once a day, according to a set of rules that is consistent with the LinkedIn algorithm. And it really taught me. I mean, I was kind of, when I first got on LinkedIn, I refer to it as kind of my headless chicken phase, that I was just kind of running around with no plan. And I was just, kind of posting content 3 times a day, which is a terrible strategy because even if you have a popular post, the second post you make in the same day will actually decrease the growth of the first post and the second post. And then a third post, it makes it even worse. And so I was just throwing good content down an empty well for months. And so, a big part of it was learning through Albert's program, how to use LinkedIn properly. And, part of it was content development and part of it was understanding the importance of interaction. That, so much of growing your profile and your quote brand on LinkedIn is interacting with other people on their posts, responding to their comments on your posts, that I think in some respects that's more important than the content you develop. And so, for me, it's interesting because, I'm late in my career. And so I'm not doing it as a way to get a job or as a way to, build a brand. It's just, for me, it's just a fun way to give back to the community, to share a bit of what I've learned, to interact with some really cool people like yourself, to get to know others in the data community. And, I would encourage anybody to start doing it, that it doesn't matter how, quote, expert you are, that I think if you've got domain experience, if you've got, experience in terms of, your career. And by that, I mean, even if you're early in your career, that's an interesting experience. And I think some of my favorite people to follow are early career people who are just kind of learning as they go and sharing what they learn and sharing what that experience is like. And, for me, it's been a long time since I was in that early stage. And so hearing what that's like in the current technology context is really valuable. And so, I would just encourage, folks to get in and do it. But if you're going to do it, to spend some time learning about the algorithm and learning about how LinkedIn works. And, Albert is a great person to follow. There's a guy named Richard Vanderblom who does a tremendous amount of analysis on the algorithm itself, and he's great. So you can learn a lot, because I think content development takes a lot of work, and so if you're going to put in the work, you might as well have it be effective.
So this is a fun question I want to ask everyone, is that what would be the advice you would have given the young Brian? The young Brian in the sense, the past. What advice would have you been given?
Oh, wow. I would have a lot of advice. Because I think maybe the biggest thing is to understand what makes you happy. And I think it sounds strange, because I think we all think we know, but I've found in my career that there have been many times when I made decisions based on what I thought was expected of me, or what I thought I should be doing in terms of, kind of taking more responsibility, or taking a promotion, or taking, kind of venturing into management. And I don't regret doing it, but I felt there were times when I did things because they were just expected. I think they were kind of the natural course of what was expected, rather than really what I enjoyed and would make me happy. And so, for example, I got very far away from getting my hands dirty in the data. I was 3 or 4 levels above the data analysts, and I really got away from doing what I loved. And it happened slowly, but one day I woke up and I was like, this is not where I want to be. And I think it was not being critical of myself and saying, is this really what you want, or are you just kind of getting swept along with the tide? And I think that's one thing, is really be intentional about the decisions you make, and don't fall into things just because it's what others are doing or what others are expecting. I think, the other thing is don't try to move too fast. I think sometimes we get excited, and we just want to know and learn everything right away. And I think there is a real value in taking it a little bit more slowly, making sure you understand the fundamentals, that you're really learning at a deep level. You're learning, you're practicing, you're really building a good foundation, rather than, kind of speeding through as quickly as possible to get to what you think is an advanced level. And there have been a number of times in my career where I've had to backtrack because I sped through things that I should have spent more time learning. And so I think really building that solid foundation, and taking your time, and not being too eager to get to the next step, I think is something I would tell younger me. Younger me was a pretty impatient guy, and I think had I had more patience, I think it would have saved me a lot of trouble.
Sure. That was a lot of wisdom that you shared, Brian. So the final question is like, how do you, for example, people looking to build a portfolio project or something, I've seen several posts where Enterprise DNA as an org have hosted several challenges, right? So how could you can you give the viewers a little bit of knowledge, like what are the challenges available, or how can they start building a project using Enterprise DNA if possible?
Yeah, sure. There's a number of different ways, and we're actually launching something tomorrow. I'll give you kind of a sneak preview of. But there are 2 ways to really build a portfolio. One is a project portfolio, and these are full completed reports. And this is what I did. We run regular challenges with really real world data. There are a lot of challenges I see that are, Harry Potter or Marvel comics or something, and it's like those are fun, but do you really want to build your professional portfolio around that? And so we've taken a different view, which is, all our challenges are, you know, real world business data. We had one recently on that was hospital drug intervention treatment data and analyzing two treatment programs for comparative effectiveness. And we've had some that are supply chain problems. So one of them was how do you in real time monitor manufacturing machines to make sure you've got kind of maximum uptime to meet supply demands. We've had ones that are evaluating startup businesses. And so, it's really real world stuff that you can dig in and build a full report, not just kind of a screenshot, but a full working report with, navigation, with drill down, with, all the features you would build in a major reporting project. And that has been, for me was just a great experience because, we get some of the best developers in the world competing in these. There are folks like Alex Badu, Gustav Dudek, to name a few. Sam Mackay, the CEO of Enterprise DNA. These folks are amazing. Rashwan Mesby, just a number of folks who are just absolutely top-notch developers, and you can really learn from them. There's the ability for subscribers to download the actual PBIX files of all the entrants. So, you've got literally top developers in the world posting on these challenges, and you can download their reports and basically take them apart and figure out how they've done what they've done. And that is unbelievably valuable in building your portfolio. And then the other thing we're starting tomorrow is something called the Workout Center. And that is kind of a smaller scale practice forum where we're going to have ultimately about a dozen different experts in like every skill set that you would need to be a really top-notch data analyst. So SQL, Excel, Power BI, R, DAX, M code, Python, pandas, everything, data visualization, everything you would need to really kind of knock it out of the park as a data analyst. And each week we're going to have experts in each of those categories posting problems. And they're going to be relatively short, self-contained, so you can go in, spend 30, 40 minutes on a problem, every week in an area you want to strengthen, and really build that skill set that you want to build. And, I think having something that I like to think of as a skills portfolio. So you've got your project portfolio, which is really important. But then if somebody says, okay, we need people who are really good in SQL and in DAX, that you can tell people, okay, I'm good in that. But if you can show them, okay, here are 10 solutions I've posted publicly in each of those, and you can look and see how good I am. Like that to me is such an effective tool for both building your skills and then promoting your skills. To say, don't take my word for it. Don't take my word that I'm good at DAX. Take a look at the DAX code I'm writing, and to be able to present that in a really attractive, kind of clear way that anybody who understands that field can look at it and say, okay, I know exactly what your skill level is. I think is really going to be huge, and we're making it free to everybody, not just our subscribers, but the entire data public is going to have access to this.
As a viewer myself, I have been wanting to be wanting to participate in those challenges because it's something that first thing is that you learn, and second thing is that you have something in place to showcase, right? So
Yeah.
So that is something that I wanted to ask you, because I've got a lot of DMs when people are asking me what are the projects that they can do for their portfolios, and Enterprise DNA has this in place for all of us to make use of and learn. So it's definitely a win-win situation here. So that is all I have, Brian. I can go on and on because I definitely feel you have a lot to share to the community.
It was a pleasure talking with you. And as you know, as you can see, I love this stuff, and I love talking about it. And yeah, I think there's just amazing opportunities out there for folks. And I think you do a great job of kind of pointing folks to resources and creators, and creating your own content. And I think there's just so much out there for for users in the community, that I would just say, my biggest closing point would just be get involved. Get involved in the community, whether it's consuming content, creating content, doing challenges, doing exercises. There's everything to gain from that. And so, I really appreciate you having me on today. The hours just kind of flown by, and
Yeah.
really enjoyed it.